So if America was always the source, right, and we just showed you the Mexico proof, then ask yourself, what exactly was the Opium War about? First Opium War, 1839 to 1842. They say Britain forced China to accept opium imports from Bengal, India. Second Opium War, 1856 to 1860. Britain and France finished the job. 1 year later, 1861, the American Civil War begins. Same cash crop, same labor force, same land, different name for the conflict. But before we get to the families who ran all of this, and we are going to name them, I need to prove something to you. I told you Bengal is in America, so let's do this properly. Point by point, here is how their own colonial records describe Bengal. Massive river delta, multiple rivers combining before emptying into a bay, perfectly flat alluvial plain almost entirely at sea level, floods every season, primary crops, rice, indigo, cotton, opium, silk, every person employed making cloth, raw material extraction economy under colonial rule, mangrove swamp forests along the coast, fort built on a distributary branch of the main river, called the richest region of the entire empire. And when the people finally rebelled against forced cultivation in 1859, they called it the Indigo Revolt. Now, here is how the Library of Congress describes the Louisiana Territory, the land Jefferson purchased in 1803. Colonists produced tobacco, indigo, wax, and silk. That is from the LOC Louisiana Purchase document. You can pull it up right now at Library of Congress website. And here's what their own botanical records say about the American South. Indigo grew wild from Virginia to Louisiana. The French government successfully cultivated in Louisiana in the 1720s. The same river delta system, the same perfectly flat alluvial plain at sea level, the same seasonal flooding, the same crops, rice, indigo, cotton, silk. That is not two different places. That is one description applied to two names at two different times for one specific reason. And I know exactly when the switch happened. When America won its independence from Britain in 1776, Britain lost access to American indigo. Their own published history says it plainly. England turned its attention to India for its indigo needs the moment the colonies broke free. They did not find a new source. They renamed the one they already had. Now, before we get to the Opium Wars and the Civil War, I need you to see something that happened earlier, because this is where the pattern starts. 1. The Boston Tea Party. American patriots dump East India Company tea into Boston Harbor. This is a completely separate conflict. The Revolutionary War era, nearly 90 years before the Civil War. But look at how Bloomberg article described that single night. Chinese tea bought with Bengali money by a British corporation was dumped in the sea by American patriots dressed as Indians. Chinese tea, Bengali money, British corporation, American patriots dressed as Indians. The same extraction network was already operating in 1773. The same crops, the same territory being called by different names. The people of the actual land protesting resources being taken from them, instinctively put on the clothes of the people who had always owned it. That is not a costume. That is memory.
Yo, I found this article, published in The Nation. That's a mainstream publication, been around since 1865. Written by a man named Amitabh Ghosh. He wrote an entire book about this. And I need you to read this with me, because when you look at this through the correct lens, through what we already know about these maps, this article is saying something completely different than what it thinks it's saying. Okay, so right here, first sentence. He says opium probably started in Anatolia.
Probably.
That's their foundation. Not documented. Not proven.
Probably.
Now, what is Anatolia on a 1531 map? It's part of Asia Minor. And what did the 1531 map by the Royal French cartographer Orense find, currently sitting at the Library of Congress right now? What did it label North America as?
Asia. Cathay.
The ancient name for China. These were the maps the founding fathers grew up with. So when this man says it started in Anatolia and spread through Asia, I need you to ask, which Asia? Because on their own maps, this continent was Asia. Now he says Alexander the Great's armies carried opium into Iran, are believed to have. Second guess in 3 sentences. But here's what's wild. On that same 1531 map, Alexander's travel routes through Asia are plotted on North American geography. His place names are on shores we now call the Gulf of Mexico. I'm not saying that, their cartographer said that. The Library of Congress has the map. Look it up. Now watch this. He traces the word for opium, aphene, from Greek through Persian through Arabic into the Indian subcontinent, and then into Chinese. He's giving you a whole linguistic family tree. But there's one word he doesn't mention. One word that came from this same drug, that is still alive right now, used globally. Born in America. The word fiend. Green's Dictionary of Slang, 1886. Fiend originally meant U.S. opium addict. The National Police Gazette documented it meant specifically Caucasian smokers. That word traveled from opium dens into black communities, into AV. And today the whole world says fiending. Nobody in China says that. Nobody in Turkey says that. The word stayed here because the drug was here. Okay, so now he's talking about the Dutch East India Company using opium for colonial expansion. And then the British in India. But notice, he never once asks where in India. Because in the 16th and 17th centuries, the Dutch were operating in territory their own maps labeled India. Their own maps. The Dutch called the Delaware River the South River. Their colony was New Netherland. They were in what their maps called India. This whole paragraph is describing operations on this continent and calling it somewhere else. Right here. He says, after Britain, the country that benefited most from the China trade and the global traffic in opium was the United States. And unlike Britain in America, we can track exactly which families got the money. He names them:
Astor. Peabody.
Delano,
Forbes.
Russell, Perkins, Harvard,
Yale.
Brown University, and he says Brown was, quote, named after a prominent slave and opium trading family from Providence. That's in this article. That's not me. A penniless black man had no chance at Russell and company. But the enslaved people working the land that grew the crop, they don't even get a sentence. Now look at this. He says the traders warned their families back home, do not make any of this public. And their descendants selectively destroyed papers that mentioned opium. This is documented concealment confirmed in a peer-reviewed archive. The cover-up is cited inside the article that's simultaneously trying to tell you where the drugs came from. You can't make this up. Here's the one that locked it in for me.